Have you ever had emotional eating episodes where you felt so stressed and you felt so low in mood, depressed, that you started buying many tubs of ice cream and started turning on the TV and getting ready to binge watch your favorite TV shows just to help you feel a little bit better? So if you've done this at least once in your life, then you're in the right video, because today we're going to be talking about how to end emotional eating. So before we start, I'd like to introduce you to the first video of the emotional eating series, where I'm going to be talking about emotional eating, maybe body image, everything you want, Q&As, frequently asked questions. Make sure you comment below any questions for me to make on the next video on emotional eating. So to set the scene about emotional eating, let me just put a little disclaimer that we need to first talk about that emotions are not bad. Emotional eating isn't like bad immediately, because if you think about it, emotional eating is essentially eating because of your emotions, and the only emotion there in emotional eating isn't sadness. It isn't just anger and like fear. There are happy emotions. So it's just like when you go to a buffet or a wedding or a birthday party, you eat more than you normally do emotionally because you're actually eating because you're really happy. You're celebrating something. Emotional eating only then becomes a problem if you're using emotional eating to cope with every single stress in your life. You had a stressful day at work, emotional eating. Someone was mean to you, emotional eating. You had a little inconvenience because your car wasn't working. Okay, emotional eating. Maybe, let's think of another one. Let's say someone was late to your birthday party. Okay, you feel a bit stressed. Now you start emotional eating. So emotional eating only then becomes a problem when every time you have a inconvenience in life, you always jump straight to emotional eating. It becomes a major coping mechanism rather than a minor one. So what's the difference between emotional hunger and physical hunger? Because oftentimes we get these confused. So physical hunger often comes in gradually, like you start to feel a little bit hungry, and then you feel ravenous. It comes in slowly throughout the day, and you'd often have like a grumbling stomach, or you feel a bit lightheaded or dizzy if you haven't eaten much. And so trying to listen to your internal cues, like feeling hungry, having a grumbling stomach, or feeling lightheaded, is a way to recognize internal hunger cues. But you can tell if it's emotional hunger, where all of a sudden you don't actually feel hungry, but all of a sudden you have an intense craving all out of nowhere. Even though you had your breakfast, lunch and dinner and snacks in between, it doesn't matter about whether you've eaten or not previously, because even if you're full, when that time hits emotionally vulnerable or very stressed, then no matter how full you are, you'd often head over to the tubs of ice cream or the chocolates or the cookies. So emotional hunger is not often or heavily dictated by your internal hunger cues. So now I'm going to be talking about 4 reasons why oftentimes you might be more vulnerable to emotional eating. Number 1 is we can often emotionally eat because of boredom. So when you feel bored, restless, aimless, you feel like there's nothing going on in your life, then we try to head over to food so we can get that sense of joy to help us feel like there's something going on in life. So most people who have low motivation or feel like they don't have any purpose in life often turn to food to give them some sort of excitement or enjoyment, especially at the end of the day when you're probably working like a 9 to 5 and then it feels quite dull and you're not really like having much excitement with your work. You're not very stimulated at work. You're not really challenged in a positive way. Then you head over to food because it gives you some sense of excitement. An example for this is like when you're writing a research paper or completing an assignment when you're a student, or if you're a student and you just feel so bored or you're just lacking motivation. So you head over to the crisps to give you some sense of enjoyment or motivation. You often hear people, or at least me, I could be just talking about myself, that so you often might have heard people, or I'm just like speaking from my experience, that like when you're just bored, you try to quote unquote reward yourself with some chocolates or a chocolate bar. You often see these things on memes, like someone puts a chocolate bar on this page when you're reading a book and then puts another chocolate bar later in the pages for some sense of motivation. And whilst it's great to have some food as a motivation, it can quickly spiral into an emotional eating episode if you're constantly relying on food. Number 2 is a common reason why we often emotionally eat. It's because of sadness. So when you had a breakup or you fired from work, for example, then you feel extremely low, you feel sad, and oftentimes when we are really sad, we're like lacking dopamine. So we head over to the really sweet, really cold, creamy ice cream tubs. You often see that on TV shows where people are just watching their favorite Netflix shows or favorite TV shows and they're just eating like those tubs of ice cream, tub after ice cream, to give them some sense of enjoyment, some sense of like feeling cuddled, feeling important. So when you look at food advertisements, you often hear about Happy Meals, or you look at cereals, there are many pictures of cartoons or pictures of people smiling, a big smile, a big grin in their face, or like when you're buying eggs, like there might be a happy chicken, stuff like that. Those little things can contribute to you wanting to buy those things because you want to seek some sort of emotion, or you want to attach to someone who's smiling all the time. It gives you some sense of like internal or subconscious cue that, oh, I want to buy that because I want to have some sense of like, you know, like happiness, even if it's a tiny bit. it, and even if it's subconscious and you probably don't even recognize it, you'd like to have things where people are smiling around you or smiling with you when you're feeling low. And an interesting thing is, like, when you look at different advertisements, like for example Christmas time, you often see tons of advertisements where people are cracking up a can of soda with like Santa Claus or with a family, and then you start to associate these kinds of sodas or these kinds of foods with like some sense of like joy around the family, or like just to negate any loneliness and focus on happiness and good memories with people. So while food is great, it can't be a substitute to helping you give a purpose-driven life. Food is just a little coping mechanism, but it shouldn't be something that you always turn to. So number 3 is loneliness. So oftentimes you often heard these mukbang videos, and for those who don't know what mukbang videos are, it's essentially where someone's just eating in front of a screen. And it might sound strange, but oftentimes when people are lonely and they feel like they have no one around to be with, then it could be nice to just eat in front of someone who's also eating, or eating lots of food in front of you, because it gives a sense of community, because food is not meant to be always enjoyed alone. Food is meant to be enjoyed as a community. It's a strong community aspect thing. There's a strong social aspect. So when we go to birthday parties, then we're often like eating pizza. Pizza is a great community food because it's something that can be shared, or it's something that's delicious. So you often have these kinds of foods which are community foods, I would call them. I don't think there's actually a specific term for it, but like pizzas or fried chicken and maybe like something with rice. It depends on your culture, but food has a strong community aspect to it. And if you're feeling lonely, then that can be a trigger for emotional eating episodes. So you can kind of feel this sense of being with someone, or like at least giving you a sense of dopamine rush. If not, then most people often turn to mukbangs. You often hear these YouTube videos of mukbangs where people have like millions and millions of views because so many people are so lonely that they just want to be with someone. They want to just hear someone talk about their day as they're eating, even if they're alone and they never met that person, but it gives some sense of community. And number 4 is feeling tired. When you're feeling tired and exhausted, especially after a long day, then that can trigger an emotional eating episode, because sometimes when you just feel low, especially if you've been like restricting, like you haven't had much of a breakfast, you're skipping meals, you're under eating, that can make you feel exhausted because of your blood sugars, and low blood sugars can often feel like you want to have more cravings. So when you have emotional eating episodes, you'd often turn to the high in sugar foods or the highly palatable foods, which are like cookies, donuts, brownies, cakes. And it's alright to have those in moderation, you know, the 80-20 rule, where 20% of the foods you love, 80% of nutritious meals. But if you do engage in emotional eating episodes, which could turn into a binge eating episode where you just eat tons of those foods, then it could lead into a blood sugar roller coaster where you eat tons of food, you feel a little bit of a high dopamine wise, or probably mood wise as well, and then it turns into a massive low. So it's not a healthy coping mechanism, emotionally eating, especially every time you come home tired. So what can we do to stop emotional eating? Well, I'm gonna share 2 things that really helped me end my emotionally eating episodes, because when I was struggling with binge eating episodes, that came with emotionally eating episodes because I was so stressed. I was living in university halls, I was studying to become a dietitian, and it was so stressful, and I was quite lonely. So here are 2 ways on how to end emotional eating episodes. So oftentimes when you ask people, how are you feeling? Oh, I'm feeling quite stressed, or I'm feeling quite lonely. Remember, stressed and lonely aren't emotions. Of course it's how you're feeling, but there could be a deeper reason why you're lonely. Are you scared to reach out to other people? Are you scared to speak to people? When you're stressed, is there a deeper reason why you're feeling stressed? Are you angry at your boss for maybe clocking you in overtime? Are you scared to raise up your concerns to your boss that you're working like 5 extra hours at night and you're not being paid for it? So try to look at the deeper reasons. So the main emotions are fear, sadness, happiness, and anger. So the second step is to recognize that emotional problems can only be solved with emotional solutions. So emotional problems can't be solved with food. So emotional eating can quickly become a problem when you turn to food in order to like try to solve your problems, rather than speaking to a loved one or speaking to a licensed therapist. And oftentimes after that emotional eating episode, the next day you have the intense urge to skip breakfast or undereat. So it's a period of overeating and then undereating the next day. And oftentimes you might be fearing these foods where you try to reintroduce them. And as a little side note, you can check the link in the description for my reintroducing trigger foods course, which is free if you feel like you're scared to reintroduce these trigger foods because it's going to trigger an emotional eating episode. So oftentimes people often say like, oh, if you're struggling with emotional eating or you've gone through a breakup, for example, then head over to the gym and try to get your revenge body, trying to look good. But like ultimately, going to the gym isn't going to solve your emotional eating habits, because remember, we need to solve emotional problems with emotional solutions. So talking to someone or talking to a licensed therapist is going to be massively helpful for letting those emotions roll out. Because no matter how many times you go to the gym or try to look a certain way, if you're still struggling with deep pent-up emotions that haven't been solved with emotional solutions, then you're still going to end up emotionally eating later on throughout the day. And if you feel like you're lacking purpose, oftentimes, because lacking purpose or feeling low in motivation could lead to emotional eating episodes, then try to force yourself as much as you can. I know it's going to be very difficult, but try to reach out to a community, like maybe to a church or a hangout group or a networking group, because nowadays you can just download an app and then there's a group where many random people can just meet up to just see, like maybe go to a concert together or like multi-dating conference. I don't know what's out there. I haven't like checked, but there are so many networking events. If you just type networking event near me, then there are going to be lots of random people where you can just meet up with other people who have similar interests. There are lots of anime conventions, card collecting conventions. You can think of everything under the sun. There are lots of ways to connect with other people if you're feeling low in mood, because that's an emotional problem being solved with an emotional solution. And if you're one of those who are feeling stressed, then writing down and journaling your emotions and how you feel is really helpful, because journaling has been shown by evidence to rewire your neural pathways in your brain and reduce emotional eating episodes, reduce pent-up emotions. You're actually letting it all out, but writing it down on a journal. And also, it's important to speak to a licensed therapist or a counselor, psychotherapist as well, just to let out and untangle those knots, essentially, so you can have a straight, clear emotion of how you're feeling, and you can reflect on, like, okay, I'm feeling this way because of this, so I'm going to do this to help me feel better and release those pent-up emotions. So in summary of this video, emotional eating isn't a bad thing, but it can turn into a problematic thing if you go to emotionally eat every time you feel stressed, every time you feel lonely, every time you have a little minor inconvenience. It becomes your major coping mechanism. And once we try to realize that emotional eating isn't a healthy coping mechanism, if we do it all the time, every time we're struggling with a minor inconvenience, and we're not talking to friends, we're not talking to therapists, we're not releasing it out or just sharing it with others, that's when it can become a problem. So we need to solve emotional problems with emotional solutions, or we're still going to emotionally eat. It's always gonna pop out some form or another throughout the day or throughout the week. So I hope you enjoyed the first video of the emotional eating series, and comment below what questions you want me to answer on the emotional eating series. I can make a whole video on that. So like, comment, and subscribe, and check out my free resources, my free courses on binge eating, from regulating your hunger, trying to reintroduce your trigger foods, and many more. That's on the link in the description. Now see you in the next episode. Bye!